Caesar's tribunes and legaci Titurius, Cotta, and Sabinus are alone with their courts and urged by the enemy. It seems the Germans crossed the Rhine. Will they be able to face the new challenges? The only way to know it is to watch this video. Do not forget to subscribe and go ahead. In opposition to these views, Titurius repeatedly exclaimed that they would be acting too late if larger enemy forces, including the Germans, had already assembled, or if a disaster had occurred in the nearby winter quarters. He said the opportunity for consulting was brief. He believed Caesar had likely already departed for Italy. Neither the Carnutes would have planned to kill Testidius, nor the Eburones would have dared to approach the camp with such contempt for the Romans if Caesar had been present. He insisted that the current situation, not the enemy's words, should be considered. The Rhine was nearby. The Germans resented the death of Ariovistus and the recent Roman victories, and Gaul was inflamed by numerous insults under Roman rule, with their former military glory extinguished. Lastly, he questioned who would believe that Ambiorix would have descended to such a plan without a definite cause. His opinion was safe in either case. If there was no serious threat, they could reach the nearest legion without danger. If all of Gaul conspired with the Germans, their only hope for safety lay in speed. He asked what outcome Cotta and those who disagreed with him anticipated. If not immediate danger, prolonged siege and starvation were certain. After debating on both sides, and with Cotta and the senior officers strongly opposing, Sabinus finally said, "If you insist," raising his voice so that many soldiers could hear, "I am not one who fears death as much as the rest of you. They will understand. If something more serious happens, they will hold you accountable. If it were up to you, we would join the nearest winter quarters and face the common fate of war with the others in 2 days, not perish far from the rest, either by sword or famine." The council adjourned, and the officers surrounded the two legates, begging them not to jeopardize the safety of the whole force through their disagreement and obstinacy. They argued it would be easy to follow either course, staying or leaving, if everyone agreed. However, they sought no safety in division. The debate continued until midnight. Finally, Cotta, deeply moved, gave in. Sabinus's plan prevailed. It was announced they would march at first light. The rest of the night was spent in vigilance, as each soldier gathered what he could carry and decided what to leave behind from the winter quarters equipment. They found many reasons for staying being dangerous, and their fatigue and sleeplessness increased the danger. At dawn, they set out from the camp in a long column with many heavy packs, convinced they were following the advice of their friend Ambiorix, not an enemy. But the enemy, having sensed their departure from the night noises and watch movements, set up an ambush in 2 parts in the woods, in a suitable and concealed place about 2 miles from the Roman camp, waiting for the Romans to approach. When most of the Roman column had descended into a large valley, the enemy suddenly appeared from both sides of the valley, began pressing the rear and preventing the vanguard from climbing up, and started the battle in a place most disadvantageous to our troops. Only then did Titurius, who had foreseen none of this, panic, run about, and hastily arrange the cohorts. However, he did this fearfully and ineffectively, so it seemed everything was failing him. This often happens to those who are forced to make decisions in the midst of an action. On the other hand, Cotta, who had anticipated such occurrences on the march and therefore had not supported the departure, did not fail in any aspect of his duty to the common safety. He performed the duties of both general and soldier, encouraging and rallying the troops. As they could not easily attend to everything themselves due to the length of the column and could not foresee what was needed at each place, they ordered the troops to abandon the baggage and form a circle. Although such a plan should not be criticized in such circumstances, it was executed poorly. It both diminished the soldiers' hope and made the enemy more eager to fight, as it appeared to be done out of great fear and desperation. Furthermore, what was inevitable happened. The soldiers left their posts en masse, hurried to seize and carry off their most prized possessions from the baggage, and filled the air with shouts and cries. The barbarians were not lacking in strategy. Their leaders ordered the whole army to refrain from leaving their position. They declared that all the plunder would be reserved for them, and that everything the Romans left behind would be theirs. Consequently, they believed that all their hopes lay in victory. The enemies fought with equal bravery and determination. Our men, though abandoned by their leader and fortune, placed all their hope in their courage. Whenever a cohort charged, a great number of the enemy fell from that part. Seeing this, Ambiorix ordered them to throw their spears from a distance, not to approach too closely, and wherever the Romans made a charge, to give way, relying on their light arms and daily practice to sustain no harm, and then to pursue the retreating Romans. Following these instructions meticulously, whenever any cohort left the circle and charged, the enemies fled swiftly. Meanwhile, that part of the circle was inevitably exposed, and spears were received from the open flank. When the Romans began to return to their original position, they were surrounded both by those who had retreated and those who had stood nearby. If they decided to hold their ground, no space was left for courage, and they could not avoid the many javelins hurled by such a large number of enemies. Nevertheless, though beset by so many difficulties and receiving many wounds, they held their ground, and having consumed a great part of the day in fighting, did nothing unworthy of themselves from dawn until the 8th hour. During this time, Titus Balventius, who had commanded the first rank the previous year, a man of great courage and authority, was pierced through both thighs with a javelin. Quintus Lucanius, of the same rank, while bravely fighting to help his surrounded son, was killed. Lucius Cotta, the legate, while encouraging all the cohorts and ranks, was struck full in the face by a slingshot. Alarmed by these events, Quintus Titurius, seeing Ambiorix in the distance encouraging his men, sent his interpreter, Gnaeus Pompeius, to him to request that he spare him and his soldiers. Ambiorix responded that if he wished to speak with him, it would be allowed, and he hoped to gain something from the multitude for the soldiers' safety. He said no harm would come to him, and he would guarantee this with his own word. Titurius consulted with the wounded Cotta, asking whether they should abandon the fight and negotiate with Ambiorix. He hoped to secure their safety and that of the soldiers through this negotiation. Cotta refused to go to an armed enemy and remained steadfast in his decision. Sabinus ordered the tribunes and centurions who were around him to follow, and when he approached Ambiorix, he was ordered to throw down his arms and obeyed the command. He instructed his men to do the same. While they were discussing terms, Ambiorix deliberately prolonged the conversation, and Sabinus was gradually surrounded and killed. Then, according to their custom, the victors raised a shout and attacked our men, disrupting their ranks. Lucius Cotta died fighting bravely with most of his soldiers. The survivors retreated to the camp they had left. Lucius Petrosidius, the standard bearer, under heavy enemy pressure, threw the standard within the fortifications, but was killed fighting bravely before the camp. They withstood the attack until nightfall, and during the night, realizing their situation was hopeless, they all killed themselves. A few survivors from the battle, through unknown paths in the woods, reached the winter quarters of Titus Labienus and reported what had happened. Exhilarated by this victory, Ambiorix immediately set out with his cavalry for the Aduatuci, who were neighbors to his kingdom, not resting day or night, and ordered the infantry to follow. After explaining the situation and inciting the Aduatuci, he reached the Nervii the next day. He urged them not to miss the opportunity to free themselves forever and to avenge the wrongs they had suffered from the Romans. He explained that 2 legates had been killed and a large part of the Roman army had been wiped out. It would be an easy task to overwhelm the legion wintering with Cicero and annihilate it. He offered his assistance for this task. With this speech, he easily persuaded the Nervii. The situation is now getting serious for Caesar's legions in Gaul. How will he react to this loss? Will Titus Labienus get the situation under control before Caesar gets back to Gaul? Subscribe not to miss the next chapter of the Gallic Wars.